Hey guys, tonight we're sinking into something soft, almost candle-lit, as we step quietly into the early world of a little girl who had no idea she was being shaped for an empire. You're standing in a chilly corridor of Kensington Palace, the kind that makes your socks feel too thin. And somewhere in the distance you hear a governess reminding a child that she is not allowed to walk down a staircase without an adult holding her hand. You lean against the railing, imagining what it must be like to grow up in a place so big yet so controlled that even breathing too loudly might end up in a report to one of your caretakers. Honestly, you wouldn't survive 2 days in this place. The schedule alone would defeat you before breakfast. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening right now, go ahead and drop a comment with where you are and what time it is for you. It's always magical to see our little nighttime community all around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take a step deeper into the polished wooden hallways, feeling how the air shifts, a little cooler, a little more echoing, as though the building itself is holding its breath. This is the world of young Victoria, long before she became Queen Victoria. Long before portraits and postage stamps and that intimidating stare that could silence an entire room. Right now, she's just a girl, and you trace her steps as if you're walking beside her tiny slippers. You hear the faint scratching of quills, the tapping of shoes on marble, the murmur of staff trying not to appear too visible. Everything in her childhood is part of the Kensington system, a bizarre, highly restrictive set of rules designed by her mother, the Duchess of Kent, and her ambitious advisor Sir John Conroy. If helicopter parenting had a Victorian prototype, this was it. Victoria couldn't walk downstairs alone, couldn't play with other children freely, couldn't sleep without her mother in the next room, and at one point wasn't even allowed to enjoy quiet solitude in the garden without someone analyzing her posture. You feel a wave of exhaustion just imagining it. You follow the 9-year-old princess through a narrow passageway decorated with portraits of ancestors who don't look very friendly. She glances up at them occasionally, her expression somewhere between curiosity and a silent plea for someone to talk to who isn't paid to supervise her. You notice how tightly she clutches a small notebook. Later in life she would fill journals with observations, complaints, daydreams, but now it's just her imaginary friend, her only private space in this elaborate cage. You step into her study room, where sunlight falls in diagonal lines across the floor. She sits at a desk barely big enough for all the books stacked on it. A governess reminds her to sit properly, to speak softly, to behave like a future lady of dignity, even though no one has told her yet that she's actually second in line to the throne. That part is intentionally kept from her, hidden like a surprise birthday present, except it's a surprise job she'll never be able to quit. You sit down beside her in your imagination, noticing how she scribbles drawings of dogs, castles, dresses, even little scenes of adventures she wishes she could have. At one point she quietly mutters that she'd like to ride a horse without 3 adults watching her, as though I might escape. You stifle a laugh, because honestly, the idea of a tiny Victoria sprinting out the palace gates while governesses shout behind her feels like a rejected Pixar short. One odd fact almost no one talks about. The Kensington system required keeping Victoria slightly away from other children of royal blood, supposedly to protect her innocence. But historians still debate whether the real motive was political manipulation. Her mother and Conroy wanted control, and isolating her was the easiest way to maintain it. Some historians still argue over whether Conroy intended to make himself her official household head once she became queen. You imagine him practicing speeches in a mirror, perhaps a bit too confidently. You follow Victoria as she is led to the gardens, not to run freely, of course, but for an approved, supervised stroll. The grass glistens from earlier rain, and you hear the soft squelch under your shoes as you walk. Victoria pauses to observe a squirrel with passionate interest, as though it's the most exciting thing she's seen all week. And frankly, given her schedule, it might be. You watch her tilt her head, whispering something about how she wishes she could name the squirrel Pippin. The governess pretends not to hear. Naming wild animals is not on the schedule. As you wander with her, you feel how painfully lonely the atmosphere can be, even with all the staff. All the luxury, all the structure. It's not the loneliness of being alone, it's the loneliness of being watched. You sense that deep down. She knows something unusual is expected of her, even if no one tells her what. That quiet pressure becomes a recurring whisper, nudging her forward. You head back inside with her, tracing the familiar path to her small bedroom. It's surprisingly modest, especially for someone of her status. Simple furnishings, floral wallpaper, a single doll resting on a shelf. The rules are everywhere. No late reading, no spontaneous playing, absolutely no unsupervised roaming. She sits at her dressing table, swinging her feet slightly as she waits for someone to announce it's time for her lessons again. You lean against the wall and feel the weight of routine pressing against you like an overly tight coat. But there's something else, a spark. It's in the way she straightens her back when her mother enters. It's in the way she silently refuses to answer Conroy when he speaks to her too sharply. It's in the way her eyes flicker with stubbornness when told she must behave delicately. You can sense it. She's small, but her will is not. And it's this will that will one day break every chain the Kensington system tried to wrap around her. As the evening settles, you imagine candlelight flickering across her face. She stares into the warm glow, perhaps wondering what waits beyond this palace, beyond these rules, beyond all the expectations she never asked for. You sit there with her in the quiet, feeling the soft hum of nighttime in an old building, and you know this is only the beginning. The girl in this room has no idea she will rewrite an empire. But you can already feel the story shifting, deep within her quiet determination. And as the hallway darkens, you take one last soft breath, knowing the world outside is waiting for her, and for you to follow her into the next chapter. You drift forward from the dim corridor as if carried by the same soft draft that lifts the edges of Victoria's curtains. And you're back beside her the moment she begins to notice, in the smallest ways, that something is off. Not wrong, just bigger than her. You walk with her as she moves through another carefully structured morning. The kind where even the sunlight seems to have filled out a permission slip before entering her room. You watch her rub her eyes, stretch a little too enthusiastically, and immediately get corrected for it, because apparently, in Kensington Palace, even yawning has etiquette. You bite back a snicker. If you lived here, You'd be exiled before noon each day for improper stretching alone. As she's guided to the breakfast table, you notice the way the adults around her exchange glances. The subtle kind that feel like sewing needles slipping through fabric, quick, quiet, purposeful. Victoria catches them sometimes. Those little looks. You see the flicker in her eyes as she wonders what they're hiding. That curiosity is sharp. She's too observant for her own good, though no one says it aloud. She sits, back straight, hands placed just so, staring at the silver tea service. Her mother, the Duchess of Kent, maintains a gentle smile, gentle in appearance. Perhaps, but not in temperature. You felt warmer expressions from statues. Conroy hovers nearby, as always, like a self-appointed guardian angel who forgot angels aren't supposed to have political agendas. You can almost hear his thoughts, guide her, mold her, control her. You resist the urge to step on his foot, accidentally. Victoria eats her breakfast quietly, toast, fruit, a bit of egg, while you listen to the clink of utensils. It's a sound that belongs to the aristocracy. But the tension behind it belongs to a soap opera. The conversation around her is light, trivial, but always slightly curated. Someone mentions the health of distant relatives. Someone else mentions which members of the royal family seem particularly frail. They act like it's dinner chatter. But Victoria catches the pattern. Why is she always hearing about illnesses? Deaths? Frailties? Why does everyone suddenly look at her afterward as though checking her for cracks? She's 12, but she's not oblivious. You move with her to the schoolroom. A tutor spreads open a heavy book, genealogy. A sprawling maze of names, dates, and connections. While he drones gently, you notice him pause over a page a little too long. His finger hovers near the line of succession. The neat diagram of who becomes what and when. The room seems to hold its breath. Victoria leans forward, curious, but the book snaps shut like a startled clam. Class dismissed. You follow her out into the hall, where she glances over her shoulder, a frown pinching her forehead. She whispers almost to herself, "Why can't I see that page?" You're tempted to whisper back, "Oh, trust me, they're hiding the plot twist of your life." But you settle for walking beside her as her shoes tap softly on the stone. Later that day, you find her in the library, a room that smells of dust, leather, and the mild panic of servants making sure no book with dangerous information falls into her hands. You watch her drag her fingers along the spines. She pauses at history books, eyes lingering on portraits of kings and queens. Though no one said it, she feels it. Everyone is waiting for something from her. Then, a strange moment. She overhears two staff members whispering. You step closer. Because you're nosy like that. One mutters something about the Duke of Clarence being weaker by the week. The other replies, it would place her next in line if, but the sentence cuts off the moment they notice Victoria near the stairs. She pretends she didn't hear. You know better. As she's ushered to the garden for her supervised stroll, the least rebellious activity imaginable, she walks slower than usual. You walk beside her in matching pace. Why does everyone look at me that way? She finally asks her governess. The reply is soft, rehearsed, and useless. You're very special. Ma'am, it's the kind of answer that means everything and nothing. A breeze lifts the edges of her dress. She squints at a group of royal relatives visiting from abroad, older, frailer, a little hunched. One coughs harshly into a handkerchief. Another walks with a cane that squeaks. And Victoria, observant as ever, begins to map something out in her mind. She doesn't know the precise lines of succession, but she can do basic pattern recognition. The adults are worried. The older royals are unwell. The conversations keep circling around futures, duties, responsibilities, and she, inexplicably, is being protected like a priceless artifact. You both pause at a rose bush, petals trembling from the wind. She plucks one gently, immediately earning a disapproving look, and turns it in her hands. "Is something going to happen to me?" she murmurs. You want to answer her, but you stay silent, letting her sit with the uncertainty. One strange fact creeps into your awareness. One of those oddly specific details history likes to tuck in its pockets. Victoria's caretakers kept her ignorant of her position not only to control her but to prevent her from becoming proud or ambitious. They feared royal arrogance. Ironically, their secrecy created the opposite effect: a child constantly scanning the room for hidden meaning. Some historians still debate whether hiding the truth shaped her stubbornness or merely fed it. You return inside as the clouds thicken. Victoria stops at a tall mirror in the hallway. She studies her reflection, chin lifted slightly, as though testing what authority might look like on her face. Not out of vanity, but readiness. Or maybe defiance. Later that evening, as lamps glow softly and the corridors warm with dim golden light, she finds an old book left open on a table, probably by accident. Probably forbidden. You watch her eyes widen as she finally sees it, the line of succession. Neat and stark, with her name positioned uncomfortably close to the top. She freezes. You feel the air shift. The world seems to rearrange itself around her. She's next. The unexpected heir. The girl in the overly controlled palace is meant to be queen. You can almost hear her heartbeat, steady, louder, echoing inside her tiny chest like a drum calling her into a life she never asked for. She closes the book slowly, almost reverently, almost fearfully. And in that moment, you see her shoulders straighten. Not dramatically, not theatrically, just enough to tell you that the girl who couldn't walk down the stairs alone is starting to understand why. She walks away quietly, the long corridor stretching ahead like an uncertain future. And you follow her, step by soft step, as the knowledge settles into both of you like the weight of a crown not yet placed, but already felt. You step back into the dimness of Kensington just as the lamps are being turned down for the night, their soft flames contracting like sleepy eyes. Tonight feels different, thicker in the air, as though the palace itself knows something is coming. You sense it the moment you find Victoria standing by her bedroom window, hands pressed lightly to the glass, watching the moon hang low over the gardens. She doesn't say anything at first. She just stands there, breathing slow, as if trying to steady herself against an invisible tide rising beneath her feet. You join her, leaning close enough to feel the coolness of the window pane. Outside, the breeze drags shadows along the ground, stretching them like long, uncertain fingers, and somewhere deep inside you, you know, this is the night before everything changes. No one told her yet, not clearly, but Victoria can feel the tension in the air. The way adults whisper with tight jaws. The way her mother looks at her for a moment too long. The way Conroy circles around her like a hawk preparing an announcement he's been rehearsing for years. She's 13, an age of questions, halfway between dollhouses and dynasties. And tonight, all those questions swirl through her like restless birds. She steps back from the window and sits on the edge of her bed. The room is warm, but her expression is cool, too calm for someone who just discovered her name sits in the royal succession like a lit fuse. You sit beside her, feeling the mattress dip under you both. She exhales, brushing her fingers along the quilt. "I don't understand why they hide things from me," she whispers. You watch her rub a thumb over the seam. A tiny repetitive motion that betrays her nerves. You want to tell her that adults hide things from children because they assume secrecy equals protection. Even when it breeds more fear than clarity. But she doesn't need you to answer. She already knows. A strange scraping sound breaks the quiet, a door hinge somewhere in the hallway. Victoria stiffens. Kensington is full of noises at night. Most harmless. Some suspiciously like someone carrying out a plan in soft shoes. You exchange a look with her. A silent guess. Someone is awake who shouldn't be. You follow Victoria as she slips off her bed and tiptoes to the door. Her bare feet whisper across the floor. She opens it just slightly, the tiniest crack, and peers into the hall. You peek too. Two servants hurry past, whispering urgently. You hear only fragments. "Duke, fever, doctor summoned?" Their voices fade down the staircase. Victoria closes the door quietly, leaning her forehead against it. Another royal relative is gravely ill. Another possible heir closer to the throne than she is. Except, now, not many are left. You watch her straighten slowly, like a thread being pulled taut. She walks back to her bedside table and opens a small wooden box. Inside are letters. Simple notes from her uncle King William. Kind, affectionate, and slightly chaotic, as though he wrote them while swatting away political annoyances. She picks one up and reads it again, lips tightening when she reaches the line where he calls her, "my little niece with the bright mind." She closes the letter gently. Even you can feel the heaviness of that gesture. She climbs into bed, but she doesn't lie down yet. Instead she sits upright, knees hugged to her chest. Staring at the wall, her breath is slow but not relaxed. Someone outside the window laughs, one of the palace guards. Probably sharing a late-night joke. She flinches at the sound. Not from fear, but from anticipation, like she's waiting for something inevitable to arrive. A distant bell rings. Victoria's eyes lift. It's not a normal sound. You both freeze. That bell usually means someone of importance has taken ill or worse. You hear footsteps muffled by rugs. Voices whispering in anxious knots. You can't make out the words. But the tone is unmistakable. Something is shifting. Victoria slides under her blanket now. Not to sleep, but to listen. Her breathing quickens slightly, not panic, but bracing. You feel your own heart sink with hers as the palace murmurs outside her door. A few minutes pass, quiet but not peaceful, and then, a knock. Not loud, not urgent, just deliberate. Her governess enters, face pale, lips tight. She tries to look casual, but her hands betray her, ringing. Trembling slightly, You should rest, ma'am, she says. Victoria stares at her. Is the Duke sick again? She asks. The governess hesitates too long. Yes, she finally murmurs. Quite sick. Victoria nods once, and the woman leaves, closing the door behind her. You sit there in the half-darkness as Victoria slowly lies down. Eyes open, staring at the ceiling. Her candle guttering on the table casts little waves of orange light across her face, making her look older, wiser, quiet but aware. Everyone is waiting for me to become something. She whispers. I can feel it. You breathe out softly, sinking into the moment with her. One strange fact floats into your awareness, something small, obscure. The night before Victoria officially became queen, she reportedly slept unusually lightly, as though sensing her life was about to crack open like an overripe peach. Some historians still argue whether she was awakened early because messengers rushed the news, or because she was already half awake, awaiting it. You're watching that same quiet pulse of anticipation in her now. She turns onto her side, pulling the blanket close. Her room is silent except for the faint creaking of the old building settling into the night. For a moment, everything feels suspended, the kind of calm that exists only in the seconds before a life divides into before and after. Finally, as her eyes begin to soften with exhaustion, she whispers a final thought, too soft for anyone but you to hear. If it is me, I hope I will be ready. You lie there beside her in the stillness, feeling the weight of the future pressing gently at the door. A breeze slips through the window. A candle flickers out. And somewhere in the palace, footsteps approach, soft, steady, carrying news that will change everything. You wake with her before dawn. Though wake isn't quite the right word. Victoria wasn't really asleep when the footsteps reached her door. You felt it in the slight shift of her breathing. The way her fingers twitched on the blanket as if bracing for a voice she already expected. The palace is wrapped in that cold, bluish pre-morning glow, the kind that smudges every corner with quiet uncertainty. You sit up with her as the knock comes, soft, respectful, yet carrying the weight of centuries. Her governess enters first, face pale, posture stiff with importance. Behind her stands the Archbishop of Canterbury, looking as though he hasn't slept in 3 days and might never sleep again. He clears his throat once, twice, and then says the words that tilt Victoria's entire world on its axis. Your uncle, King William, has passed. You are now queen. Victoria doesn't gasp. She doesn't cry. She simply sits there, eyes wide but calm, like someone who had already sensed the truth hovering over her pillow all night. You watch her draw one slow breath, deeper than any she's ever taken, and place her bare feet on the cold floor. There's a tremble there, but also steel. She stands. She is 18. And now, Queen of the United Kingdom. You feel the palace shift as she moves, as though the walls are adjusting themselves for their new resident sovereign. The servants bow a little lower. The guards straighten a little taller. Even the portraits, judging by their stern expressions, seem to be reassessing her. They lead her to a small sitting room, where her mother hovers far too close. As usual, Victoria subtly steps out of her reach, a tiny act of independence. The first of many she's been storing up like secret coins. You follow her into the room, feeling the weight of expectation settle across your shoulders the way it now settles across hers. The ministers arrive one by one, each wearing solemn expressions that scream, "Please, for the love of the crown, don't faint." But Victoria doesn't. In fact, she does something quietly extraordinary. She asks for privacy. Privacy. In front of her mother. In front of Conroy. In front of everyone who has controlled her since birth. "No one is to remain with me," she says. Clear. Calm. Firm. You almost applaud. The room freezes. Her mother's eyes widen in shock. Conroy's mouth tightens. For years they've treated her like a delicate porcelain figurine. And now she is giving commands like a sovereign. The request is granted, reluctantly, and suddenly Victoria is alone with the prime ministers and archbishops. You stand beside her, feeling how her presence shifts. She sits straighter, speaks more clearly, listens more intently. The shy girl from last night is still there. Yes, but she's being wrapped, thread by thread, in something larger, something steadier. She listens as they outline her first duties, as they discuss the proclamation, as they mention her first official council meeting, just hours from now. You can feel her pulse in the air, elevated but not frantic. This is what happens when someone who has been caged their whole life is finally handed the key, even if the key is made of responsibility and the cage is shaped like a crown. When the officials leave, she retreats to her room to prepare. You follow her in, noticing how she closes the door gently behind her, as though savoring this newfound autonomy. She touches the edge of her dressing table, then sits to brush her hair. Her hands tremble slightly, and she steadies them with a soft exhale. "I am 18, she whispers. The words are not fear. They're realization. Then, almost as a joke to herself, she adds, "And I suppose I must act it now." You smile. The sense of humor is still there, a good sign. She'll need it. As she dresses for the morning council, the palace buzzes with movement. Courtiers rush in all directions. Servants carry fresh uniforms. Horses are being readied for messengers. You walk beside Victoria down the long corridor that leads to her first council meeting, a tradition where the new monarch faces rows of very serious, very important men who all hope she doesn't trip over her own title. The double doors open quietly, and the room falls silent. You feel the heat of dozens of eyes locking onto her. A young woman, small in stature, but walking with a resolution that seems to surprise even herself. She steps forward, her chin lifted slightly, not proud, but present. There's a subtle tremor in the air, the kind that hums whenever history rewrites itself. She sits. The council begins. And she doesn't falter. She listens. She asks thoughtful questions. She speaks carefully but confidently. Later, many of the men in the room would remark on how composed she seemed. Some insisted there was a moment when the sun shifted through the windows just so, lighting her hair like a halo. One minister wrote that she behaved as if born to the role. Others argued she had never looked younger or more determined. Yes, historians still debate which impression is more accurate. But you know what you saw? A girl who stepped into a role she never asked for, never trained for, but somehow fit into with startling clarity. When the council ends, Victoria walks out lighter than before. Despite the gravity of the day, You follow her down the corridor, her steps firm, echoing off the marble. There's no triumph in her expression, not yet. Just a quiet resolve, a glow that wasn't there yesterday. She returns to her chambers, sits at her desk, and draws her first breath as a queen truly alone with her thoughts. And you sit beside her in that stillness, knowing that this moment, this fragile, extraordinary moment, is where her story truly opens its eyes. You slip back into Buckingham's hushed corridors just as the sun begins its lazy climb. And you find Victoria in a moment that should be peaceful but absolutely isn't. She's standing before a mirror, face composed, hair pinned, shoulders drawn tight beneath the weight of routines she hasn't yet learned. Being queen looked glamorous yesterday, from a respectful distance. Anyway, but now that you're both inside the machinery, you feel how it grinds. This morning is the infamous bedchamber crisis. Though of course no one calls it that yet. Right now, it's just a very irritated young queen trying not to let her eyebrows speak her thoughts too loudly. You stand beside her as she straightens her dress for the 5th time. As if smooth fabric could smooth politics. She whispers, "I wish they would stop arguing over who should be in my bedroom." You wince. Fair enough. The issue is simple on paper. The Queen's ladies of the bedchamber, essentially her inner circle of noblewomen, currently belong to the same political faction as her favorite Prime Minister. Lord Melbourneites, Whigs, the cozy crowd, but with the elections shifting power to the Tories. The new Prime Minister, Sir Robert Peel, expects that his faction should replace them. Standard procedure, logical, reasonable. Except Victoria is 18, newly crowned, anxious, and surrounded by the only women she trusts, even if they're barely more than stylish security blankets. You feel her breath tighten when she thinks of them being replaced. It isn't just change, it's intrusion. Melbourne arrives, calming as ever, smelling faintly of old books and political experience. He bows, offers his gentle half-smile. And Victoria softens. You feel it too. He's a soothing presence. Heart mentor, heart father figure, with the patience of a seasoned therapist dealing with a particularly stubborn client he's grown fond of. Peel arrives soon after, stiff as a lamppost. Upright, proper, a little uncomfortable in his own skin, like someone who ironed not just his clothes but also his personality. Victoria listens, politely at first, as he explains that government stability requires replacing her ladies with Tory-aligned women. She blinks, once, slowly, then says, "No." You watch Melbourne suppress a smug smile. Peel's face twitches. Victoria's voice sharpens, just slightly. "I will not have strangers in my personal rooms." Her tone implies these strangers might as well be wolves in ball gowns. Peel explains, again, that this is standard. You almost see him mentally flipping through a political etiquette manual. Victoria's answer is still no, but firmer. A deep, velvet-lined absolutely not. Peel realizes she's not budging and withdraws, in that slow, polite, wounded manner of a man trying not to trip over dignity on his way out. The moment he's gone, Melbourne exhales as though someone lifted an elephant off his chest. You catch Victoria's expression, satisfaction with a side of relief. But you also sense the storm brewing. Because here's the thing. Refusing Peel means he cannot form a government. That means Melbourne stays in power. Which means Victoria just made a major political decision, fueled partly by loyalty, partly by fear, and partly by the stubbornness she honed during the Kensington years. Historians still debate whether this was a calculated move or an emotional one. Some claim she acted on principle. Others think she panicked. Honestly, watching her now, it's probably a rich cocktail of both. The crisis ignites. Newspapers buzz. Ministers gossip. The public speculates. Even the palace footmen seem to walk faster. As if scandal crackles in the air. And you're right in the middle of it with her. Watching a young monarch learn how power behaves badly. Mostly. Later that afternoon, Victoria escapes to her private sitting room. She sinks onto a softness of cushions and buries her face in her hands. You kneel next to her, feeling the heat of embarrassment, the tightness of frustration. She mutters something about Peel being unreasonable. You privately note Peel probably thinks the same of her. A small, strange fact drifts into your mind. One of the lesser-known details of this crisis is that Victoria reportedly wrote long, emotional letters to Melbourne throughout the ordeal, not royal decrees. Just letters, confiding, venting, asking for guidance, almost like a teenager texting her favorite teacher during a meltdown. It humanized her, even if politicians later rolled their eyes at it. She straightens eventually, eyes red but determined. I will not be pushed, she says. You feel that. Her resolve has roots now, deeper than you realized. Evening creeps in, flickering warm light across her face as she sits by the window. She watches the city breathe below, gas lamps glowing, horses trotting, lives continuing regardless of royal theatrics. She sighs softly. They think I don't understand anything, she says, but I understand loyalty. You watch her fingers tap the windowsill. A quiet rhythm marking the growth she doesn't yet see in herself. Tomorrow, the crisis will continue. Tomorrow, people will judge, criticize, scold, debate. But tonight, she is just a young queen learning that power is heavy, stubborn, and often quite rude. You stay beside her as the palace quiets again, the corridors cooling into soft, peaceful shadows. The world has shifted, yes, but so has she. And in this dim light, you realize, the girl from Kensington is already beginning to rule. You return to Victoria's side in a quieter moment. One of those rare afternoons when the palace finally exhales and stops behaving like a pressure cooker lined with velvet. The bedchamber crisis has cooled, at least for now, and Victoria moves through the halls with an energy that feels lighter, almost curious. And today, something shifts in the air. Not political, not ceremonial, something gentler. Because today, you're walking with her toward a drawing room where a young man waits. Prince Albert. You feel Victoria's nerves before you see him. She smooths her dress 3 times, touches her hair twice, and rehearses a greeting silently like a student preparing for an exam. You lean in, whispering in the privacy of your imagination. Relax. You're a queen, not a debutante at a high school prom. She doesn't hear you, but she straightens anyway, as though sensing she needs to appear composed. The doors open. Albert stands near the window, framed by soft daylight, dark curls, sharp jaw, posture so correct it might have been sculpted rather than taught. He bows, and Victoria's pulse practically hums through the room. You feel it, this tiny spark. Not love, not yet, more like recognition, like seeing the missing piece of a puzzle you didn't know you were trying to finish. She steps forward. "It is good to see you again," she says, her voice steadier than she feels. Albert looks up, eyes soft, and replies with a gentle formality. But beneath that, you spot something else. He's nervous too. His hand twitches once against his coat. The smallest tell. You almost grin. Turns out even princes get sweaty palmed. Conversation begins stiffly. Weather, health, travel. It's a polite dance between two people pretending not to be fascinated by each other. You follow them as they walk through the room, their steps falling into an unintentionally synchronized rhythm. You know how sometimes you match strides with someone and suddenly feel strangely connected? That's happening here, and Victoria definitely notices. She smiles at one of Albert's remarks, an awkward joke about English rain, and the way her smile softens is new. Softer than her usual royal composure. You feel her warmth spilling into the space between them. Albert, emboldened, shares an unusual hobby, cataloging musical compositions and studying philosophy. Victoria laughs lightly. "I have never met anyone who enjoys listing things as much as writing them." He blushes, actually blushes. You savor the moment. One lesser-known fact sneaks into your mind. Albert kept detailed notes about nearly everything during his youth, including categories of plants, poems, even the etiquette mistakes he'd made at social events. Historians still debate whether he did this out of ambition or genuine enthusiasm. Watching him now, you suspect the latter. He's earnest in a way that almost feels out of place among royal theatrics. Victoria leads him to a small round table where her sketchbook lies open. She'd been doodling earlier, little crowns, dogs, bits of garden scenery. Albert glances at the page and compliments her drawing. She beams, though she quickly tries to hide it. You lean in, amused, for someone who can command armies. She suddenly turns shy over a compliment. They talk of music next. Albert mentions Beethoven. Victoria admits she once tried to play a piece so passionately she broke a piano string. You stifle a laugh because the image is perfect. Tiny Victoria attacking a keyboard like a heavy metal musician. Albert, unexpectedly delighted, asks her to play something now. She hesitates. Royalty doesn't typically perform like a parlor act, but then her eyes soften. And she says yes. You follow her to the piano. She sits, inhales, exhales, and begins. The melody spills out, graceful, delicate, but with hints of the iron will beneath. You notice Albert watching her not like a queen, but like someone discovering a new language. For Victoria, this is the first time in ages someone sees her, not the crown, not the crisis, not the succession, not the responsibility, just her, the girl who once scribbled stories in a notebook under Kensington's oppressive rules. The girl who wanted to name squirrels. The girl who dreamt of freedom before she learned its weight. When she finishes, silence hangs for a moment. Albert claps softly, sincerity radiating from him like gentle sunlight. You play beautifully, he says. Victoria blushes this time. You want to nudge her and whisper. You're both hopelessly adorable. Their conversation drifts into easier territory, childhood memories. Books they loved, foods they secretly dislike. Albert hates overly sweet puddings. Victoria hates boiled carrots with an almost philosophical passion. There's laughter now, real laughter. The kind that warms a room faster than any fireplace. But beneath the sweetness, there's tension too. Both understand, even if unspoken, that this meeting is more than a casual introduction. Royal marriages aren't just personal, they're political. Dynastic, loaded. You feel the quiet pressure threading between them. And yet, something else is happening. Something not scripted. You see it when Albert reaches for a book she recommended. When Victoria's eyes linger a little too long on his hands. When both try very hard to appear calm while being absolutely not calm inside. You feel their thoughts brushing against each other like two hesitant fingertips. A quiet truth settles in the room. This isn't just duty. It isn't just expectation. There is potential here, shapeable, fragile, alive. And then, a final detail, one small and obscure, years later. Victoria would write in her journal that during this early meeting, Albert seemed so sensible, so kind, so good. She underlined the word good. Historians still debate what she meant by it. Character? Comfort? Compatibility? But sitting here, watching them breathe in the same gentle rhythm, you think you understand. Good meant he made her feel seen. The afternoon wanes. Footsteps echo in the hallway. Duty calls Albert elsewhere. He bows. She curtsies, both far more reluctantly than protocol allows. When he leaves, the room feels different, lighter but emptier. Victoria stands still, fingers brushing the piano keys. You step closer and feel her heartbeat settling into a rhythm that hints at something new forming. And as the door clicks shut behind Albert, you hear her murmur under her breath. I like him. You smile softly into the quiet room, knowing this is only the beginning. You return to Victoria's side on a morning humming with a strange, nervous brightness. The kind that fills the palace whenever something monumental is about to unfold. But the staff hasn't quite figured out whether to panic or to polish the silver just a little more aggressively. Today is the day Victoria makes a decision that flips tradition on its head, wraps it in a bow, and politely hands it back to the world with a smile. Because today, she is going to propose. You walk with her through Buckingham Palace as she moves with an anxious gravity that seems to ripple off her skirts. Her ladies try to maintain the usual serene atmosphere, but you can feel their excitement buzzing around the edges like bees trying not to bump into the royal furniture. Victoria, however, is focused, staring at her reflection in every passing mirror. Rehearsing sentences silently, smoothing invisible wrinkles, checking her hair as though the emotional stakes of a proposal depend entirely on a well-behaved curl. She whispers to you, soft as a confession, I mustn't frighten him. You almost laugh. Him? Albert? The man who becomes flustered when someone compliments his coat? Oh, he'll be fine. A knock interrupts her spiraling thoughts. Albert has arrived. Victoria inhales sharply, the kind of breath you take before diving into a cold lake, and you feel her nerves settle into determination. She is a queen. After all, queens do not tremble. Well, ideally. You enter the drawing room with her, and there he stands, Prince Albert. Looking polished, princely, and just awkward enough to be disarmingly human. His eyes brighten when he sees her, and for a moment Victoria forgets her rehearsed lines. You catch the moment her composure melts into something soft. They talk, light conversation, pleasant, comfortable, but beneath Albert's polite tone, you see it, uncertainty. He's waiting for something, maybe approval from her, maybe permission, maybe a sign that the affection he feels isn't just duty wrapped in royal protocol. Victoria's fingers twitch ever so slightly at her side. She clears her throat with royal purpose. "Albert," she begins, voice steady but warm. He straightens, hopeful, cautious. She takes a step closer, close enough that you can feel her heartbeat skimming the air between them. "I wished you to come here today," she says, "because it would make me very happy if you would consent to marry me." You hold your breath. Albert blinks once, twice. The man practically short-circuits. History remembers this moment as graceful, elegant, deeply touching, but watching it now, you see the adorable chaos underneath. Albert is delighted, overwhelmed, breathless, blushing so profoundly it might be visible from orbit. He bows his head, stammers something incredibly sweet and unintelligible, then finally says the words clearly. "I will do my utmost to make you happy." Victoria lets out the tiniest, most relieved exhale, so small you'd miss it if you weren't standing right here beside her. And then something charming happens. They both stand there awkwardly, grinning like two teenagers trying to figure out what comes after "yes." You can almost hear Albert thinking, "Do I take her hand? Hug her? Bow again?" And Victoria thinking, "Please don't faint. Please don't faint. Please don't faint." You want to whisper. You're allowed to smile at each other. You know. But they figure it out. Slowly, naturally. She reaches for his hand. He takes it. And the whole room shifts, as though history itself exhales. Now, in the middle of this quiet happiness, a strange little detail surfaces in your memory. Something obscure but surprisingly endearing. Victoria wrote in her journal later that day that Albert looked so pretty when she proposed. Pretty, not handsome, pretty. Historians still debate whether she meant it playfully or genuinely. Watching him now, blushing, soft-featured, eyes shining with sincerity, you understand exactly what she meant. After the proposal, the two wander the room like gentle ghosts, talking about the future, music, family, responsibilities. Small hopes that spill between them like little lanterns lighting their path. Albert speaks of wanting to support her in her work, not overshadow. Not control, but support. You see how deeply that moves her. How it grazes the parts of her that have always been guarded. Always watched. Always managed. They talk about dogs, gardens, plans for a quiet life that will probably never happen. But imagining them is sweet nonetheless. Victoria admits she is afraid of some things, public expectations, political storms, the pressure of being young. Albert admits he's afraid too, of disappointing her, of failing the role he hasn't yet stepped into. The honesty makes the room feel warmer. Eventually Albert must leave, duty pulling him back into the intricate world of royal scheduling. But as he reaches the door, Victoria calls softly, "Albert?" He turns. She steps closer. And she says, with earnest warmth, "I am very, very happy." Albert's smile, small, sincere, radiant, could light 100 dim palace halls. When he's gone, Victoria sits alone for a long moment, hands clasped in her lap, gaze soft and distant. You feel her emotions swirling, joy, relief, excitement, an undercurrent of fear, but also something steadier, something that feels like the beginning of trust. She whispers, almost to herself, almost to you, "He is the one." You exhale with her, sinking into the warm afterglow of a day where tradition bent just enough to let two young hearts choose each other, not as a strategy, not as a necessity, but as something quietly genuine. And as the palace settles into evening, candles flickering like gentle stars, you feel the future opening ahead, bright and complicated and full of the kind of love that reshapes empires. You return to Victoria's side on a morning glittering with possibility. The kind of morning when London feels like it's inhaling before a grand reveal. The palace corridors are buzzing, not with political tension this time, but with excitement, curiosity, and a sense of spectacle so large it barely fits within the walls. Servants hurry past carrying crates, velvet robes, and program sheets. Ministers stride purposefully, pretending they aren't secretly thrilled. Even the usually stone-faced guards seem subtly brighter. Because today, you and Victoria are heading toward the greatest celebration of innovation the world has ever seen. The Great Exhibition. You feel her anticipation the moment she steps into her carriage, chin lifted, eyes bright, dress shimmering in the soft spring light. Albert sits beside her, posture straight but expression warm. He designed this thing, conceptualized it, fought for it, defended it against skeptics who called it absurd, or recklessly ambitious, or a glass monstrosity that will collapse on the first windy day. Albert endured every jibe with a calm dignity, the kind that quietly says, "Just wait." Victoria saw it all, watched him pour himself into the project like it was both a duty and a dream. And today, she's practically glowing with pride. The carriage rattles through Hyde Park, and then you see it, rising between the greenery like some ethereal apparition made of air, steel, and sunlight. The Crystal Palace. It looks unreal, an enormous greenhouse for the world's imagination, a shimmering cathedral of glass stretching farther than your eyes can track. The sun hits the panels and scatters sparks of light across the trees. Across Victoria's face, across the excited crowd gathering outside. She inhales sharply. "Oh, Albert," she whispers, voice floating with awe. "It's magnificent." Albert doesn't smile broadly, he rarely does, but there's a glow beneath his expression. A softness of triumph that warms the entire carriage. You step out with them onto the gravel path, feeling the tremble in the ground from thousands of spectators. People cheer, flags wave, children perched on parents' shoulders squeal in delight. Every face reflects astonishment. Inside the Crystal Palace, the air feels like a deep breath of spring, cool, airy, shimmering with light. The vast interior stretches endlessly, filled with exhibits from across the globe, machines clanking rhythmically, sculptures gleaming under glass panels, fabrics dyed in colors you didn't know existed, inventions so strange they seem plucked from dreams. Victoria moves slowly, reverently, like she's stepping through the dawn of a new age. You follow her past towering steam engines that puff warm air across your face. Past intricate clocks ticking in precise harmony. Past displays of raw materials from the empire's far reaches: gold, tea, spices, minerals, textiles. The world is gathered here, contained beneath sunlight and steel. One peculiar object catches her attention: a machine designed to peel apples with mechanized efficiency. She tilts her head, fascinated. Albert laughs softly. "I suppose even monarchs must eat," he says. You smile. Innovation never forgets the basics. A lesser-known fact drifts into your thoughts. Victoria later wrote that the exhibition felt like walking inside a fairy palace. Historians debate whether she meant it poetically or literally, considering she once described a rather ordinary dinner plate as most enchanting. Watching her now, eyes wide, steps slow, you suspect she meant it sincerely. This place has that effect. Crowds part respectfully as the couple moves through the hall. Albert explains designs, concepts, origins. Victoria listens eagerly, her admiration for him radiating so clearly that more than one observer exchanges knowing looks. He pauses beside a massive printing machine, describing how it may revolutionize the distribution of books. Victoria's eyes sparkle. "Imagine," she murmurs, "stories reaching every corner of the country." Albert smiles, proud not only of the machine, but of the way she sees beyond it. Cameras flash, the new invention everyone's still slightly terrified of. Victoria tries not to blink too hard. A photographer bows, plates his equipment, and waits for the moment when the couple stands close enough for a perfect exposure. Albert leans in. "Don't move." Victoria mutters, "I am trying." You try not to laugh at the rigid stillness they adopt, like elegant statues posing for posterity. They continue the tour, marveling at fabrics from India, porcelain from China, intricate metalwork from Africa, American agricultural tools, French fashions, German optics. The world has gathered under one roof, not with the sharp edges of diplomacy but the curiosity of creation. At one point, Victoria pauses near a mechanical fountain. Water arcs gracefully into a crystal basin, catching sunlight in soft rainbows. She leans closer, not caring that the mist might dampen her gloves. "It feels like magic," she whispers. Albert's voice is soft behind her. "It is science." And then she says something that startles even herself. "Perhaps science is another kind of magic." You feel the truth of it settle warmly around you. Later, as they rest beneath the vaulted glass ceiling, Victoria looks around, not at the glitter or spectacle, but at the people: children laughing, workers marveling, aristocrats whispering with surprise, inventors proudly demonstrating their life's work. The world mingling in one vast, luminous space. "This," she says quietly, "is what progress should feel like." Albert's fingers brush hers. "Then let us help it continue." You feel the soft hum of that promise, rippling outward like invisible threads weaving through the future. A strange little fact floats to the surface. Some newspapers predicted the Crystal Palace would collapse under its own weight, raining glass shards upon horrified visitors. Others claimed birds would fly into the ceilings and die en masse. Neither happened. Instead, people filed through its halls for months, leaving awe-struck and changed. As evening descends, the palace glows softly, light shimmering through its panes like a lantern for the world. Victoria steps outside to a sea of applause, her face alight with joy, pride, and something deeper, certainty. The exhibition wasn't just a marvel. It was a statement. Her era is no longer merely unfolding, it is igniting. And as you walk with her back toward the carriage, the last rays of daylight gleaming on the glass behind you, you feel history expanding around her like a living, breathing thing, vast, shimmering, and full of possibility. You return to Victoria's world on a day when the sunlight feels too sharp, too brittle, one of those mornings where everything looks normal, but nothing is. The palace corridors are quiet in the wrong way, not serene, but watchful. Even the footmen move more softly, as though afraid a single misplaced sound might shatter something fragile. Albert is ill. You stand beside Victoria in her private sitting room as she paces, fingers twisting anxiously around a handkerchief. Her footsteps patter in uneven rhythms, echoing her breath, shallow, quick, threaded with fear. She's heard that he's unwell before, of course, colds, headaches, fatigue, but this time is different. This time, the physicians look worried, and Victoria, always so alert to the tiniest shift in Albert's moods, knew something was wrong long before the doctors admitted it. A messenger enters, bowing. "Your Majesty, the prince is asking for you." Victoria doesn't wait for the sentence to finish. She sweeps past him, skirts trailing behind like a rushing tide. And you follow her down the corridor, past familiar portraits, past dim alcoves, past everything that once felt safe and stable. Her breath trembles. You feel the panic simmering beneath her determination. She pushes open the door to Albert's room. The air inside is warm but heavy, thick with the scent of illness and burning candles. Albert lies in the bed, propped up by pillows, his face pale, his curls damp with sweat. His eyes lift when Victoria enters, and the tired smile he gives her threatens to break your heart clean in two. She rushes to his side, taking his hand, holding it as though anchoring herself against a storm. "My dearest," she whispers, her voice cracking on the edge of a sob she refuses to let fall. "Why did no one tell me you were this unwell?" Albert squeezes her fingers weakly. "I didn't want to alarm you." You feel her fury spark, not at him, but at life, at illness, at every unfair turn of fate. She presses her forehead lightly to the back of his hand, breathing through the ache swelling inside her chest. A physician clears his throat gently. "We believe it may be typhoid, ma'am." Victoria stiffens. You feel the icy dread crawl through her spine. Typhoid is not a cold. It is not a passing discomfort. It is a shadow that has haunted royal households for generations. Albert tries to reassure her, though speaking strains him. "I will recover. Do not fret so." But his voice wavers, and Victoria's fear deepens. You stay close as she settles in a chair beside him, refusing to leave even when the physicians suggest rest. She strokes his forehead, murmuring soft reassurances, stories from their early days, small memories meant to comfort, to tether him to the world. But her eyes keep flickering with panic, tiny, desperate flashes. At one point, Albert drifts into a feverish doze, murmuring about unfinished work, about improvements to sanitation, about schemes he never got to complete. Victoria leans closer to hear him. He whispers faintly, "There is still so much to do." She closes her eyes, breath quivering. "We will do it together," she whispers. A strange, lesser-known fact nudges your awareness. Years later, some would claim Albert's final illness was worsened by exhaustion, overwork, stress, the relentless pressure he placed upon himself. Historians still debate whether the fever alone killed him or whether his devotion to responsibilities slowly wore him down. Sitting here now, you feel the truth unspool quietly. He worked too hard for too long. Victoria sees it too. As the hours slip by, she refuses to move from his side. She reads to him in a trembling voice, tells him of the children's letters wishing him well, describes the snow falling lightly outside the window. Anything to keep him tethered to her. But Albert drifts in and out of consciousness. Sweat beads on his brow. His breathing grows labored. At moments, he grips her hand as though grounding himself. At others, his gaze slips past her, unfocused and distant. You feel the dread thickening around the edges of the room. Victoria calls the physician again and again, demanding answers no one can give. She blames herself, quietly, fiercely, irrationally. If I had insisted he rest more, if I had managed his burdens better, if I… Albert interrupts her with a soft whisper. You gave me purpose. She breaks, just a little. Tears burn at the corners of her eyes. Though she tries to blink them back, you feel her heart break, raw and sharp. Evening creeps in, shadows stretching across the walls like reaching fingers. Albert's fever spikes. Victoria panics, calling for cold cloths, for more doctors, for anything. She doesn't leave his side, not to eat, not to rest, not for a second. As she presses a damp cloth to his forehead, Albert opens his eyes, soft, tired, but filled with a depth that makes the room grow painfully still. My dearest Victoria, he whispers, whatever happens, you must continue. With strength. She shakes her head fiercely, tears spilling. Do not say such things. You must rest. You will recover. Albert smiles faintly. I am not afraid. Please don't be either. You want to reach for her, to steady her, but you can only stand with her as her world begins to crack at the edges. Albert drifts into unconsciousness again, his breathing shallow. Victoria leans close, her forehead touching his. You promised we would walk through life together. She whispers, don't you dare leave me. The room grows unbearably quiet. Even the candles seem to hold their breath. Then, faint footsteps, a physician returning, a murmur too soft for her to hear. But you hear it, you feel it, the truth hanging in the air like a storm cloud ready to split open. Albert's life hangs in a fragile, trembling balance. And Victoria, your Victoria, fierce, proud, determined, sits there breaking quietly as the love of her life slips further from her reach. The night deepens, and the future darkens with it. You return to the palace at an hour when night and dawn blur together. When the world outside seems drained of color and the silence inside feels too heavy to breathe. You know before you even step into Victoria's private apartments that something in her has broken, cleanly, devastatingly, irrevocably. You feel it in the hush of the corridor, the way every servant moves as though walking through grief-thickened air. Albert is gone. You find Victoria exactly where she was hours ago, beside his bed. Still in the same gown. Hands still wrapped around his now cold fingers as though warmth might miraculously return if she holds tightly enough. Her face is pale in a way that frightens you. Not fragile pale, but emptied pale, like grief has drained the very color from her bones. She doesn't look at you. She doesn't look at anyone. Her gaze is fixed on him, on the man who steadied her, loved her, believed in her more fiercely than anyone ever had. The man who supported her through crises, through children, through days of brilliance and days of fear. Her anchor, her companion, her heart. You move quietly to her side. She whispers, in a voice scraped raw, "I was not ready." The understatement hits you like a blow. No one, no queen, no woman, no heart, could ever be ready. Her body shakes, not dramatically, not theatrically, just small tremors from a soul that's been abruptly torn open. She lays her forehead against Albert's hand, eyes closed, breath quivering. "I did everything they asked of me," she murmurs, "but they never told me how to live without him." You feel the truth of it like a blade, Victoria. For all her stubbornness, for all her authority, has always been tethered to Albert. His steadiness balanced her fire. His calm softened her storms. And now, stripped of him, she feels unmoored. The physicians murmur condolences, the kind polished by habit, inadequate by nature. She doesn't hear them, not really. Her world has narrowed to a single point of loss. When they finally ask, gently, apologetically, if they may prepare the body, Victoria shakes her head violently. No. Her voice cracks on the word, but her command is absolute. No minister, no physician, no protocol dares to push her. She stays. Minutes stretch into something endless. Eventually, gently, painfully, she presses one last kiss to Albert's forehead and lets the physicians guide her away. Her steps are slow, as if her limbs no longer understand movement. You walk beside her, feeling each footfall like a splinter in your heart. In her private chamber, she collapses into a chair. Her hands hover in the air. Uncertain, she doesn't know what to hold onto anymore. Everything in the room feels wrong without him. Too bright, too warm, too alive. She covers her face with both hands. And she cries. Not the delicate, restrained tears of a monarch. Not the tidy sobs expected of royalty. She cries with the raw, unfiltered grief of a woman who has lost the love of her life. The sound of it is heartbreaking, wet, broken, trembling. You sit beside her in silence, not intruding. Just being there, the quiet presence she needs when words have no place. Eventually, exhausted, she lowers her hands. Her eyes are puffy, red-rimmed, but fiercely alive with pain. "I cannot show myself," she whispers. And this is when her seclusion begins. You follow her through the next days as she withdraws from the world. Curtains drawn, public appearances cancelled, ministers barred unless absolutely necessary. She wears only black, deep, heavy mourning black, as though dressing her grief in visible armor. Servants speak in hushed tones. Even the palace clocks seem to tick more quietly out of respect. One lesser-known truth surfaces. Victoria insisted that everything associated with Albert remain untouched, his clothes laid out, his rooms preserved, his personal effects exactly as he left them. Historians still debate whether this was devotion or obsession. Watching her now, you understand, it wasn't madness. It was protection. If she kept his world intact, maybe she could pretend hers hadn't collapsed. Days turn into weeks, and the withdrawal deepens. Victoria avoids the council, communicating through letters. She refuses public appearances. She cannot bear to hear music, especially pieces Albert loved. When their children enter the room, she clings to them fiercely, then pulls away abruptly, overwhelmed by how much of their father she sees in their faces. One evening, she sits by the window, the world outside blurred by rain. You watch her grip the windowsill so tightly her knuckles blanch. "I failed him," she whispers. You shake your head instinctively, even though she cannot hear you. Albert's death was no one's failure, not hers. Not the doctor's, not fate's. Illness has no reasoning, grief lies. "Everything I built," she murmurs shakily, "was with him beside me. Without him, what am I?" You feel the silence that follows like a cold draft. It takes her days, weeks, to speak to ministers again. Months before she can walk through the palace without breaking down. Years before she appears regularly in public. Some historians argue she abandoned her duties. Others say grief reshaped her into something fiercer, quieter, more complex. But sitting here with her, watching her struggle to breathe through sorrow, you understand a deeper truth. She didn't retreat out of weakness. She retreated out of love. Love that bruised her. Love that anchored her. Love that, in breaking, remade her. And as night settles again around the palace, thick and somber, you sit beside her, silent, steady, knowing this is one of the darkest passages she will ever walk through. But she is still Victoria. And even in grief, she will rise. Slowly, quietly, painfully, yet inevitably. You enter the palace again on a day when the shadows feel longer than they should, thin, stretched, weary. Victoria moves through them like a ghost wearing a crown she can barely feel. Months have passed since Albert's death, but the palace still breathes in hushes, as though afraid of startling her grief. You follow her into the quiet of her private corridor, where portraits of ancestors watch her with blank indifference. She avoids Albert's portrait now, not out of coldness, but because every glance at his painted eyes cracks her open again. She clutches a letter in her trembling hand, one he wrote years ago, ink now smudged in places where tears have fallen again and again. "Albert, my everything," she whispers. Her voice breaks. But today, something different waits for her. Not comfort, not peace. Just a new presence that the palace staff whisper about with curiosity and, occasionally, disapproval. John Brown. You first see him as Victoria steps into the dim corridor leading to the gardens. He stands there with the solidity of an oak tree, broad-shouldered, blunt-faced, expression unflinching, a Highland servant, a man deeply loyal to Albert, fiercely loyal to the Queen, and utterly indifferent to courtly delicacy. He bows, roughly, almost impatiently, "Your Majesty." His Scottish accent thickens the air. Victoria barely nods, eyes hollow. She moves past him toward the garden. Brown follows, a few paces behind, protective in a way that feels more survival instinct than protocol. Outside, the cold air bites. Victoria flinches. Brown notices. "Ye need a cloak, ma'am," he grumbles. She doesn't answer. Brown steps forward anyway, draping a heavy plaid shawl around her with the ease of someone who has decided he won't ask permission to keep her alive. Victoria startles, not at the gesture, at the familiarity. "You forget yourself," she says softly. Brown doesn't flinch. "I forget nothing, ma'am." Then, bluntly, "Ye've no business catching her death." You almost choke. No one speaks to a queen like that. No one except someone who truly, deeply cares more about her well-being than about the throne she sits on. Victoria's eyes widen only slightly. She hasn't been spoken to without delicacy since Albert. And something about the rough honesty steadies her, just faintly. She whispers, "Thank you." Brown nods once and steps back, arms crossed, watching her with hawk-like vigilance. As they walk the path together, Victoria's grief moves with her like a cold wind. She stops beside a tree where she once stood with Albert. Years ago, her breath shivers out of her. You hear the tremor under her voice when she says, "It all feels so empty now." Brown responds with a soft grunt, not dismissive, not mocking, just present, solid, honest. Loss is like that. The simplicity hits her harder than any polished condolence. She turns to him. "Do you miss him too?" Brown's jaw tightens. "He was a good man. Best I served." Victoria nods. That alone binds them, a small thread of shared loyalty in the vast ocean of her loneliness. Back inside, court whispers begin. You hear them. Servants murmuring that the Queen spends too much time with Brown. Ministers muttering that his influence is concerning. Nobles raising eyebrows at his brusque manner. The gossips whisper stories far more scandalous than the truth. Victoria ignores them all. But you see what many would later misunderstand. John Brown doesn't flatter her. He doesn't tiptoe around her fragile state. He doesn't bow with elaborate reverence or speak with courtly polish. He simply cares. One odd, lesser-known detail floats into your mind. Brown would often insist Victoria go riding even when she refused to leave her room. Some days, he practically dragged her outside, scolding her gently about her health. Historians still debate whether she obeyed because she trusted him or because she couldn't summon the will to argue. Watching them now, you know the truth lies somewhere in between. One afternoon, Victoria sits by the fire, staring into the flames as though searching for Albert's face in the flicker. Brown enters quietly, without waiting to be announced. "You've not eaten since morning, ma'am," he says, fading. Victoria's voice is barely a whisper. "What does it matter?" Brown stiffens. Then, in a tone as sharp as freezing rain, "It matters because your people need ye alive. And because he'd be furious to hear ye talking like that." Victoria's breath catches. "Do not speak of him like. I'll speak truth when ye won't." Brown interrupts. You brace yourself, but Victoria doesn't rage. She doesn't cry. She breathes. Slowly, unsteadily, but with the sense that for the first time since Albert's death, someone has pulled her back from the edge. Later that evening, when the palace darkens and grief creeps back through the cracks of her heart, Brown sits outside her door. He doesn't intrude. He doesn't comfort her directly. He simply remains within reach. steady as a mountain. And Victoria, lying in her bed with tears drying on her cheeks, whispers into the dim room, "I am not alone." You stay beside her, watching as grief shifts shape, not leaving, not healing, but becoming bearable because someone has stepped into the shadows to keep watch. Historians will debate this relationship endlessly: friendship, dependence, scandal, salvation, but you see it clearly. This is not romance. It is survival. Two grieving souls, bound by loyalty to the same man, learning to steady each other through the long, crushing quiet. And slowly, very slowly, Victoria begins to rise again, carried not by grandeur or duty, but by the rough, honest care of a man who refuses to let her disappear into her sadness. A new chapter of her life begins. Softer, stranger, and, unexpectedly, healing. You return to Victoria's side on a morning when the sky is a soft, milky gray, neither bright nor bleak, just muted, like the world is adjusting itself to match her slow return from grief's deepest shadows. The palace feels different now. Not lively, not joyous, but gentler, less suffocating, as though the staff have collectively exhaled after months of holding their breath for her. Victoria steps into one of the long corridors, her black mourning dress trailing behind her like a dark ribbon. Her steps are still careful, cautious, as though she's relearning how to move through a world Albert no longer inhabits. But there's something new in her posture. Something quietly resilient, a faint spark that wasn't there before. It's not happiness. It's not closure. It's return. Slow, hesitant, but unmistakable. You follow her down the corridor toward a council meeting, her first full one in months. The ministers gather nervously, adjusting papers, exchanging discreet glances. They've missed her guidance, her sharp instincts, her firm but earnest leadership. And yet they are uncertain about how she will be. How fragile she remains, how deep the crack in her world still runs. The door opens. Victoria enters. The room rises instantly. She nods, not with the old youthful briskness, but with a steady calm that commands attention without demanding it. You can feel the ministers collectively realize she is diminished by grief. Yes, but not broken. The meeting begins. Victoria listens more than she speaks at first. You feel her weighing every word, every report, every concern. There's a slight tremble in her hand when she picks up a document. But she steadies herself. When a minister hesitates over whether to burden her with a difficult update, Victoria lifts her chin. "Please continue," she says. "I must know everything." Her tone has changed, softer, lower, but also deeper, quiet steel instead of bright fire. You sense the shift reverberate across the table. This is a new version of Victoria. Wounded, yes, but wiser, more aware of her own limits and strengths. When the discussion turns to foreign policy, Victoria offers a remark, measured, precise, insightful. The ministers blink. One nearly drops his pen. You almost smile. Grief may have slowed her, but it sharpened her clarity. Later, when the meeting ends, a younger minister approaches to offer condolences again. Victoria stops him gently. "Thank you," she says, "but let us look forward. There is much to do." You feel the air warm slightly around her, respect growing not from duty, but from recognition. As she leaves the council room, she pauses in the hallway, eyes closing briefly. The exertion has cost her. You sense the wave of exhaustion crash over her, the kind that begins in the soul and radiates outward. And then, soft footsteps behind her. John Brown. He doesn't speak at first. He simply stands beside her, silent and solid. She breathes a little deeper with him there. "You're pushing yourself hard today," he says quietly, voice gruff but not unkind. Victoria opens her eyes. "I must. I owe it to them." Brown huffs. "And to yourself, ma'am, don't forget that." You watch her exhale, the weight on her shoulders settling into something more balanced. "I am trying," she whispers. Brown nods once. "I ken that." The simplicity grounds her in a way ornate words never could. Later in the afternoon, Victoria surprises the household by going outside, properly outside. Not just a few steps into the garden. She walks the grounds of Windsor, the wind tugging at her veil, her boots brushing the early spring grass. You walk with her, feeling the cold air flushing life back into her cheeks. She stops at a familiar oak tree, the one she and Albert once picnicked beneath. Her face softens with memory, and you brace yourself for the collapse. But she doesn't collapse. She kneels, touches the rough bark, and whispers, "I remember." Not in despair. In gratitude. A subtle, almost imperceptible shift. When she stands again, Brown is there, holding out a hand, not touching her, just offering balance. She takes it. The gesture is small but profound. The Queen accepting help, not from crown or court, but from someone who sees her simply as a person who hurts. One lesser-known fact floats into your thoughts. Victoria often credited Brown with bringing her back into the world, though she rarely said so publicly. Historians still debate whether he saved her emotionally or merely distracted her. Watching them together now, you know the truth is far simpler. He reminded her she was still alive. As the sun begins to dip, Victoria returns indoors. She pauses in a quiet gallery lined with portraits, Albert's among them. She steps toward his image slowly. This time, she doesn't look away. She gazes at the painting with a sadness that runs deep, but also with something gentler, an acceptance, or the beginning of one. She reaches out and brushes her fingertips along the gilded frame. "I will go on," she whispers. It's not a promise to the empire. It's a promise to herself. And to him. You stand beside her in the dimming light, feeling the tide begin to shift inside her. Grief still weaves through everything she does, but no longer as a consuming wave. More like a quiet undertow, shaping her, strengthening her. She turns away from the portrait, her steps steadier, her posture lifted, not by duty, but by a small spark of reclaimed purpose. Victoria is not whole yet, but she is rising. And this rise, slow, quiet, human, is where her legend softens into something beautifully real. A queen returning to herself. One breath at a time. You return to Victoria's side on a morning wrapped in warm summer light. The kind that fills every corner of the palace with soft gold. It's an unusual brightness for a queen who has spent so long walking through dim corridors, wearing shadows like a second skin. But today, something in her shifts, as if the sunlight has finally convinced her to open one more window. Take one more step outward. Breathe one fuller breath. Today is her golden jubilee. 50 years on the throne. You can feel the weight of that number even before she rises from her writing desk. Half a century of ruling a nation that never stops turning. Half a century of births, losses, wars, inventions, scandals, triumphs, and all the quiet, unseen moments that never make the history books. Half a century of evolving from a young, sheltered girl to a woman shaped by love, grief, responsibility, and sheer endurance. Victoria adjusts her black dress. She still wears mourning, though the fabric has softened over the years into something lighter, gentler. Brown died just last year, and the ache is fresh, but she carries it differently now. Not crushingly, not blindly, more like a bruise she presses sometimes to remind herself of everything she has survived. You feel her inhale deeply as servants bustle outside her room. She knows what today means, not just for the empire, but for herself. 50 years. And she's still here. She walks down the corridor with slow dignity. Each step steady, grounded, deliberate. You notice the palace staff watching her with a kind of tenderness usually reserved for family. Even ministers, usually stiff as old furniture, soften at the sight of her. Because today, she is not just a monarch. She is a living era. You step into the carriage with her as it rolls through London's streets. And the sound hits you first, a wave of cheers so loud and so heartfelt it vibrates through the wheels. Tens of thousands of voices. People leaning out windows, waving flags, pressing up against barriers just to catch the faintest glimpse of her. Victoria watches them through the glass, eyes wide, not with pride, but with something closer to disbelief. They still care for me, she whispers. Not a boast, a wonder. You sit beside her as the crowd roars again. Children waving ribbons. Elderly men doffing their hats. Working-class families shouting her name. And beneath the cheers, there's something else humming through the air. Gratitude. Because they remember a young queen. They remember a devoted wife. They remember a grieving widow. And now they greet a monarch who has endured and kept going. Even when her world cracked open more than once. The carriage reaches Westminster, and Victoria steps out to a sea of color. Banners ripple in the breeze. Flowers spill over every railing. The streets are so densely packed it seems the city itself has moved closer to embrace her. Inside the abbey, the ceremony begins. Music swells, organ tones deep and resonant. Voices rising like a living tapestry. Victoria sits beneath the high arches. Head bowed slightly, absorbing every sound, every word, every presence. There's a moment, quiet, almost private, when the choir sings a hymn Albert once loved. You feel the tremor in her breath. Her fingers curled gently into her lap. But she does not collapse. Instead, she lets the memory wash through her like a warm tide, softening rather than tearing. A lesser-known fact slips into your awareness during this jubilee. Victoria carried a small locket containing Albert's portrait, hidden inside her dress. Historians still debate whether she touched it during the ceremony. Watching her now, you feel certain she does, just once. Gently, with a thumb brushing the metal through the fabric. After the service, the procession continues. Crowds everywhere, smiles everywhere, The sheer scale of affection seems to overwhelm even her. At one point, the carriage slows near St. Paul's, and Victoria, moved beyond measure, stands briefly, one gloved hand pressing to her heart as she bows her head to the people. The crowd erupts. You feel her swallow back emotion. "How kind they are," she murmurs. "How very kind." Back at Buckingham in the late afternoon, the palace hosts a garden gathering, small enough to feel human, significant enough to honor the moment. Trees sway under long streamers. Brass musicians play softly near the fountain. Courtiers mingle. Children from London charities laugh as they're given treats by palace staff. Victoria steps into the garden slowly. People bow, curtsy, smile. She smiles back, still tentative, still carrying grief, but warm, real, present. One elderly woman approaches with tears in her eyes. "We've grown up with you, ma'am," she says. "We're proud of you." Victoria's breath catches. She touches the woman's hand gently and whispers, "Thank you." Later, she walks alone toward a quiet corner beneath an oak tree. You follow, the evening sunlight turning her silhouette into something soft and golden. She whispers, "When Albert died, I thought my life had ended." Then, after a long, trembling pause, "But I lived, and I have seen such wonders in these years, such invention, such progress, such kindness. I never imagined I would still be here." She closes her eyes. "And I never thought I would feel peaceful again. Not whole, not healed, just peaceful." It wraps around her like a soft cloak. This newfound gentleness. The shadows lengthen, lamps flicker, the warm hum of celebration fades into the distance. And you feel Victoria breathe deeply, her first truly unburdened breath in years. Tonight, she is not the girl of Kensington. Not the young queen of crises. Not the grieving widow hidden away from the world. Tonight, she is a survivor. A symbol. A woman who has lived through storms and found her way back into the light. A queen embraced by her people. And, finally, ready to embrace them back, you return to Victoria's world on a morning when time itself seems to slow, gentle, suspended, as though the air is aware that it surrounds a woman nearing the end of one of history's longest and most remarkable journeys. The palace feels quieter than usual. Not in grief this time, but in reverence. Even the servants move with softened steps, as if unwilling to disturb the hush of reflection settling over everything. Victoria sits near a window in Osborne House. Her favorite retreat, the place she once escaped to with Albert. Where life felt simpler, freer, more intimately human. She's older now, her once dark hair silvered, her posture more curved, her breath occasionally catching with age. But her eyes are still sharp, deep, and observant, full of memories that stretch across continents and decades. You sit near her as she watches the early morning waves lapping gently against the Isle of Wight's shoreline. The sound is soothing, like the ocean is whispering back all the stories she once lived through. The years have carved lines around her eyes, softened her hands, slowed her steps, but they have not dimmed her presence. There is a gravity to her still, a quiet power born from endurance. She touches the windowpane lightly. "It feels strange," she murmurs, "to have lived long enough to see the world become something I barely recognize." You feel her meaning. The Victorian era, her era, has launched the world into dizzying transformation. She witnessed more change than perhaps any monarch before her. Railways binding the nation. Telephones crackling with ghost-like voices. Electric lights chasing away the dark. Ships crossing oceans faster than thought. She saw empires expand, territories shift, sciences bloom, revolutions spark. And in her final years, something even stranger, something she never imagined in her youth, begins to unfold. Automobiles rattling down London streets like noisy metal beasts. They say the horseless carriage will soon be common, she says, lips twitching with a mix of amazement and bewilderment. I suppose even queens must adapt. You smile. Some historians would later debate whether Victoria truly supported motorcars or simply tolerated them with long-suffering resignation. Watching her now, you know the truth. She accepted the world's progress with bemused curiosity, even if she grumbled about the noise. Later, she moves through Osborne's halls slowly, cane in hand, her steps measured but purposeful. Portraits line the walls: Albert, her children, her grandchildren, her ancestors. She pauses in front of each one, breathing in the memories tied to their faces. She stops longest at Albert's portrait. Her fingers hover over the frame. My love, she whispers, not with grief anymore, with gratitude, with a lifetime's worth of softened ache. You feel how deeply he remains woven into her, how he lives in her decisions, in her compassion, in her resilience. Every day she ruled after his death was a testament to the strength he helped her find. As she walks on, a young equerry approaches, a man barely older than her eldest grandchildren. Your Majesty, he says gently, there are constitutional papers prepared for your review. Victoria steps aside, smoothing her dress. Her voice is faint but firm. Bring them. Because even now, frail and aging, she works. She always works. She reviews documents with a magnifier. Her hands steady, her mind razor sharp when it comes to matters of state. Ministers still rely on her judgment. Leaders across Europe still send letters. Even her grandchildren, royalty scattered across nations, write frequently, eager for her approval, her advice, her warmth. A lesser-known fact drifts into your mind. Victoria wrote thousands upon thousands of letters throughout her lifetime, so many that historians still haven't read them all. She was a prolific communicator. Her pen never still, her thoughts never idle. Even in her final years, she corresponded with astonishing energy. In the afternoon, she walks in the gardens, slowly, leaning on a cane, but with a fierceness that surprises the attendants hovering nervously behind her. She pauses near a rose bush Albert once admired. They still bloom, she says quietly. You know she isn't talking about flowers. The day winds into twilight. Lamps glow. Shadows stretch long across Osborne's halls. Victoria returns to her sitting room, where the fire crackles softly. She sits in her chair, her favorite one, and looks toward the sea again. There's a softness in her expression, something serene, almost luminous. She whispers, I have lived a very great deal. Then a smile, small, worn, wise. And I have loved a very great deal. You feel the truth settled gently around her. She has survived childhood isolation, political turmoil, childbirth 9 times, personal loss beyond imagining, and the transformation of an entire world. She has seen empires rise, inventions reshape humanity, and her own family scatter across royal houses that stretch from Russia to Spain. She closes her eyes. "I hope," she murmurs, "that I have done some good." The understatement is almost breathtaking. Night deepens. The fire dims. Her breath grows slower, steadier, her body sinking into the softness of the chair. You sit with her in the quiet, sensing the twilight of a life that has illuminated an era. You can feel history itself leaning closer, listening to her final thoughts, preparing to carry her legacy into the future. And as she opens her eyes once more, gazing at the distant moonlight rippling across the sea, you sense she is ready for the last chapter. Not yet ended, but nearing its gentle close. A queen at the end of an age, wrapped in memory, softened by time, and held tenderly by the world she helped shape. You return to Osborne House on a winter morning glazed with pale frost. The world outside so soft and quiet it feels like nature itself is holding its breath. Inside, the palace is warm but muted. Lamps burning low, fires crackling gently as though afraid to disturb the hush settling over everything. You feel it instantly, the way the air shifts around a life nearing its final. Tender hours. Victoria rests in her bed now, propped up with pillows, wrapped in layers of blankets that seem far too heavy for her increasingly delicate frame. Her breath is slow, a gentle rise and fall beneath the quilts. Outside her window, the sea murmurs against the shore, a sound she has always loved. Familiar and soothing, a lullaby for a life that has finally known enough. You sit beside her as she drifts in and out of wakefulness. Sometimes she speaks, soft, wandering fragments of memory. Sometimes she sleeps, her face peaceful, her hands folded lightly on her lap. And sometimes, she looks out the window with a faint, faraway smile, as though seeing people who aren't there anymore. Albert, Brown, her mother, her children as they once were, young, bright, running through Buckingham's gardens. A half-century of faces that shaped her heart. You feel her shifting through these memories like a traveler taking one last gentle tour of all the places that made her who she is. The physicians stand by quietly. They know, everyone knows. Still, visitors come in soft waves, grown children, grandchildren, trusted attendants. They take her hand, kiss her forehead, whisper words of love and gratitude. Victoria listens, nods, squeezes hands with what strength she has left. She has ruled so long. One whispers in awe. She has lived so deeply. Another murmurs. But Victoria seems beyond such assessments now. She is drifting in a place between here and there, anchored only by the soft pulse of life that flickers inside her like a candle nearing its final brightness. In one lucid moment, she turns her head slightly toward you, eyes warm with the clarity of someone who has seen enough to be at peace. "I think," she whispers, "I have done all I could." You feel the truth of it ripple through the room. She has ruled an empire, raised 9 children, loved one man with a devotion that shaped her soul, and guided her nation through decades of transformation. She survived losses, crises, and the crushing weight of grief, and still she rose each time. Steadying herself, steadying her people. Her voice weakens as she adds, "Tell them, I was not perfect, but I tried." And you know she means everyone, her family, her subjects, the world. The winter light shifts across the room, softening the edges of everything. You hear the faint crash of waves outside and imagine Albert somewhere in that horizon, waiting gently, patiently. Hours pass. Evening settles like a sigh over the estate. The fire dims. The lamps glow low. Her breathing becomes lighter, airier, almost translucent. She whispers something, so soft you lean closer to hear. Peace. A single word, filled with release. Then her eyes drift closed. Not in exhaustion, but in acceptance. Her final breath leaves her like a feather. Quiet. Gentle. Complete. The room does not collapse into grief, it fills with stillness. A long, tender pause. The kind that follows a life fully lived. The queen who rewrote an empire has gone. But she does not leave emptiness behind. She leaves legacy. She leaves strength. She leaves the echo of generations shaped by her endurance, her love, her flaws, her power. You remain beside her for a while, letting the softness settle, letting the world catch up to the significance of the moment, letting her story come to rest inside memory. Outside, the sea continues its quiet lullaby, as though escorting her gently into the next world. Eventually, attendants draw the curtains, light candles, and move with reverent silence. A chapter closes. An era ends. But her presence lingers, like a warm shadow, like a whisper in the halls, like a heartbeat beneath history. You walk softly from the room, carrying her story with you. And in that dim corridor, you feel her legacy shine not like a crown, but like a lantern, soft and steady, guiding the world forward, long after she herself has gone. End of script. Sweet dreams.